Yo guys, welcome back, and today we're going to be talking about the worst weapons in COD history, at least in my opinion. If you enjoy, please like and subscribe, and yeah, let's get into it. So, the first one we're going to talk about is the Mini Uzi in COD 4. So, in the earlier COD games, guns were usually very rigid and similar. What I mean by this is that everything was based on the same few stats, and the Mini Uzi just has the worst combo, that being high fire rate, high recoil, and low damage. Also low range as well. That's a theme in this video. Next, the Namboo in COD WWII. So, like COD 4, a lot of World at War weapons were very basic and quite similar. However, in my opinion, this is a case of a weapon that is actually alright, however has one very glaring flaw. Let me explain. So, it has the same damage as the rest of the pistols, it has low recoil, it has a quick reload. And you might think, okay, that's not that bad, like, why is it on this list? Well, yeah, it does. However, it has a very major downside, being that its iron sights are actually wrong. No, seriously, look it up. You have to aim a little bit off to the, I think it's the right, but don't quote me on that. It's either the right or left. I think it gets mixed up in my mind. You might say this is harsh, but it's my list, so deal with it, I guess. Next, the F2000 in MW2. Now, as a gun itself, it's not that bad, but in the context of MW2, it's pretty poor. It's your typical high fire rate, high recoil, and low damage assault rifle, which exists in most COD games. But in the context of MW2, where the TTK is generally pretty low, and a lot of the good weapons, the meta weapons are generally low recoil as well, this is just quite frankly not good enough. But in general, this weapon isn't actually all that bad, all said and done. Next, we're going to be talking about a couple weapons from BO1. Yes, it is my favourite COD game, but I have to admit that there is a lot of bad weapons in this game, sorry. So the first one is the Sawn-off. This has to be probably the worst sniper I've ever seen. Not only does it have the typical Sawn-off issue of low damage and high recoil, but because in BO1, snipers generally weren't really that good. They're heavily nerfed from the previous games. This makes it about 1,000 times worse than normal. Also, its sight looks pretty weird, in my opinion. Next, the China Lake. Now, this is a grenade launcher that you will unlock pretty late at level 48, that round. But it definitely wasn't worth the wait. Oh, goddamn. Anyway, this thing had the splash damage of an actual puddle, and actually doesn't work in close quarters. This weapon was also in MW2, which could have made this list in all fairness, but explosive weapons were very strong in that game. And despite the thumper, the MW2 version not exactly being the best, it more so benefits from the game itself than anything. And also from BO1, the ASP, which I think is the worst pistol I've ever seen. It does no damage, it has a tiny mag, it's 7 rounds, it has terrible iron sights that you can barely see. Yeah, it's pretty obvious why this thing is not very good. And finally, from MW3, the M16. Now, this gun really declined from the other MW games. In COD 4, it was godly. In MW2, it was still good, but not the best. However, in this game, it's definitely not a very good weapon. In fact, I would argue it's bottom tier. It was very rarely a one burst, and it was just average in every other respect. This is especially bad compared to the ACRs, SCARs, and Type 95s of the world. The first, the MK14 from Advanced Warfare. Now, for a first attempt, Advanced Warfare was actually a decent game from Sledgehammer. Well, rather, a first game by themselves. There was, however, a lot of problems. One of the major ones being weapon balance. This game is not balanced at all. But the thing is that one of the victims of this was the MK14. Whilst, in terms of stats, wasn't terrible, like I've seen worse, the problem is that it's a semi-auto weapon in a advanced movement game. The MK14 is actually pretty good in MW3, a game that Sledgehammer had a major hand in, but the damage was decreased in this game from the MW3 version, but at least in that game, you couldn't really get out of the way, so yeah, that's why it's on this list. Next, speaking of that, the COD WWII M14. So, there's a lot I could say about this, but I'm going to heavily simplify it down to it's just a weaker G3. Now, the M14 is admittedly a consistent two-shot, so that is something working in its favour. However, it doesn't have good recoil and its iron sights aren't that good. Compared to the G3, which has good iron sights, low recoil, and about the same TTK, so there is literally no reason to pick this over the G3. You also unlock it later as well, if that puts the final nail in the coffin. Next, the M16 from Advanced Warfare. Now, I don't know what Sledgehammer has against the M16, or the MK14 at that, but this one was even worse than the MW3 version. And if you don't know or remember, that was in the last video, which should tell you a lot about how bad this weapon actually is. Now, the fire rate is pretty bad, especially for an advanced warfare, and the fact that it's a burst, it's pretty weak for that. Not only that, it's not even a one burst, very rarely, unless you get 3 headshots, which in a game like Advanced Warfare is not exactly common. Also that, there was also no reason to pick this weapon over something like the BAL or the SM1, so this is, yeah, definitively going into the bin. It was also a DLC weapon if it makes it even funnier for you. Next, the Sawn-off shotgun from COD WWII. Now, I'm just going to say it, this is probably the worst gun in COD history, at least primary weapons anyway. So it has not the highest damage, very bad range, which you'd kind of expect. Only 2 shots for a reload, which again, you would expect. But the reload itself takes a while. And do you want me to tell you what's even the funniest thing? This is actually the buffed version. It makes you think. I mean, I will admit, I don't quite remember the pre-buffed version, but Jesus Christ, if that's the buff version, I'm for a bit of horror for whatever that is meant to be. Next, the PM63 from BO1. Now, this isn't the worst thing in BO1, Uzi, but I'm not going to sit here and give this one a pass. In fact, a lot of BO1 SMGs aren't that good. The MPL and Kaparis also come to mind, but I don't think they're bad enough to be on this list. Only an honourable mention. But I think this is the worst of the 3. It has high recoil, the same fire rate as the MPL, which admittedly isn't a bad thing. Which is basically its only strength. It has bad damage profile, and it has a tiny magazine size. It should be very clear why it's on this list, if it wasn't already. I've had to spell out for you. Next, the VLK Rogue from MW 2019. Now, this is a bad gun in a rather frustrating game, at least for me. This gun is just a bit flimsy. I don't really know how to describe it. It has crappy range, questionable damage, very high recoil, although for a shotgun it doesn't matter as much, it also just kicks up on your screen. I remember this was MW 2019, a game where big maps were very common. The TTK was fast, which you'd think would work in this gun's favour, but it really doesn't half the time. And along lines of sight, it should be obvious why a gun like this struggles with the range of about 2 meters. Next, the FTAC Recon from MW2 2022. So this one might be the most controversial on the list, because the actual weapon isn't terrible by itself, but it's more so the stuff, a few extra things that you put into it that makes this thing pretty bad in my opinion. Now, yes, it doesn't have the highest damage, but it has a high fire rate, which you think, okay, that's alright. But here's the problem. The mag size is tiny. Say, for example, the max mag you could put on it was 15. And that means that if you ran into more than one person, well, you're gonna die, and that was a major problem with this weapon. But I think a lot of people like this weapon for some reason, because it was admittedly satisfying to get a kill with. But yeah, I can't really discount it based on that. Yeah. Also, I think if this one had say a 30 mag, this one would actually be a very good weapon, in my opinion, but still. And finally for this video, the S12 from BO2. Now, the S12 suffers generally from the fact that it's in BO2, there's a lot better choices. But not only that, it's just not very good. The major problem is the range. Its ideal range is 3 meters, and it does 0 damage per 15, which is, it's pretty bad anyway, let alone for BO2, which, with all the overpowered weapons in that game, that makes this even worse. But anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and comment down below what weapons you think I've missed, or what I should do next, and yeah, bye.